The amber glow of kerosene lamps flickered against the adobe walls of the McKinnon house as Sarah pressed a damp cloth to her swollen lip. Through the window, the dusty streets of Copper Creek lay silent under the Arizona moonlight, save for the distant sound of revelry spilling from Murphy's saloon. She winced as the cloth touched the fresh cut, her reflection in the cracked mirror showing a woman aged beyond her 28 years. "Sarah!" Tom's voice boomed from the kitchen, slurred and dangerous. "Where's my damn supper?" She steadied herself against the washstand, her ribs aching from where he'd shoved her against the doorframe an hour earlier. The smell of whiskey had been thick on his breath then, but she knew it would be worse now. It always got worse as the night wore on. "Coming, Tom," she called back, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. In the kitchen, Sheriff Tom McKinnon swayed beside the wooden table, his badge catching the lamplight. Once that badge had meant something to both of them. Now it was just another reminder of how far they'd fallen. His graying hair hung disheveled over bloodshot eyes, and his usually neat moustache was stained with tobacco juice. "Took you long enough," he growled, watching her ladle beans onto his plate with unsteady hands. "What were you doing in there, primping for someone else?" "Just tending to—" Sarah began. His hand shot out faster than a striking snake, gripping her wrist so hard she gasped. "Don't lie to me, woman. I seen how you look at men in town. Think I don't notice?" "Tom, please, you're hurting me." "Hurting you?" His laugh was bitter and cold. "You don't know what hurt is." "Not yet." The beans scattered across the floor as he yanked her toward him, his other hand raised. Sarah had learned to read the signs, the way his jaw clenched, the wild look that came into his eyes when the whiskey and rage mixed just right. Tonight felt different, though. Tonight felt final. "You think you're too good for me now, don't you?" he snarled. High and mighty Sarah, with her books and her fancy manners. "Well, let me remind you what you are." The first blow sent her stumbling backward into the stove. The second knocked her to the floor among the scattered beans. But it was the look in his eyes as he unbuckled his belt that told her everything she needed to know. If she didn't leave tonight, she wouldn't live to see another sunrise. As Tom fumbled with the leather, Sarah's hand found the cast-iron skillet on the floor beside her. When he lunged forward, she swung it with every ounce of strength she possessed. The sound it made connecting with his skull would haunt her dreams, but it also gave her the precious seconds she needed. Tom crumpled to the floor, blood trickling from his temple. Sarah didn't wait to see if he was breathing. She grabbed her shawl, the small leather pouch containing her life savings, and slipped out the back door into the desert night. The air was sharp and cold, a stark contrast to the suffocating heat of the house. Behind her, Copper Creek slept peacefully, unaware that their sheriff's wife had just committed what many would consider an unforgivable act. Ahead lay nothing but darkness, sagebrush and the distant mountains where Apache fires sometimes flickered like fallen stars. Sarah had no horse, no food, and no clear destination, but as she walked into the vast emptiness of the Arizona territory, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: freedom. Even if it killed her, she was finally free. Dawn broke over the Sonoran desert, like a blood-red wound across the sky, finding Sarah McKinnon stumbling through a maze of towering saguaro cacti and jagged rocks. Her feet, protected only by thin leather boots meant for walking on wooden floors, were already torn and bleeding. The shawl that had seemed adequate in town now felt pitifully thin against the desert's bite. She had been walking for hours, following what she hoped was an old game trail deeper into the wilderness. Every sound made her freeze: the skitter of a lizard, the distant cry of a hawk, the whisper of wind through the creosote bushes. Behind her, somewhere in that vast emptiness, Tom would be waking up, and when he did, his rage would be terrible. The sun climbed higher, transforming the cool dawn air into a furnace that seemed to suck the moisture from her lungs with every breath. Sarah's water, cupped from a shallow creek just outside town, was long gone. Her tongue felt thick and swollen, and dark spots danced at the edges of her vision. It was the sound of horses that saved her life. 3 Apache riders crested a ridge to her left, their ponies moving with the fluid grace of desert-born animals. Sarah's first instinct was to run, but her legs betrayed her, buckling and sending her sprawling among the thorny ocotillo. She'd heard the stories every settler heard, tales of torture, of captivity, of fates worse than death. But as consciousness faded, she found herself thinking that even those stories couldn't be worse than what awaited her back in Copper Creek. When she awoke, Sarah was lying in the shade of a ramada, a traditional Apache shelter made of mesquite poles and brush. Cool water touched her cracked lips, and gentle hands lifted her head. Through swollen eyes, She saw the face of an Apache woman, perhaps 40 years old, with intelligent dark eyes and graying hair braided with turquoise beads. "Drink slowly," the woman said in careful English. "Too much, too fast, and you will be sick." Sarah obeyed, her parched throat grateful for every drop. As her vision cleared, she became aware of her surroundings. She was in a small Apache camp, nestled in a hidden canyon, protected from the desert winds by high red walls. Women tended cooking fires while children played nearby, their laughter echoing off the stone. Warriors sat in the shade of their wickiups, watching her with expressions that ranged from curiosity to suspicion. "My name is Ayana," the woman continued, setting down the water gourd. "You are far from the white settlement. Why do you walk in the desert alone?" Sarah struggled to sit up, wincing at the pain in her ribs. I had to leave. My husband," she touched her swollen lip, the gesture speaking louder than words. Ayana's expression darkened. "He did this to you?" Sarah nodded, tears threatening to spill. "If I go back, he'll kill me. I know he will." A heated discussion broke out among the Apache men, their voices rising as they gestured toward Sarah. She couldn't understand the words, but their meaning was clear enough. Some wanted her gone. Others seemed to be arguing for, what? Killing her quickly instead of slowly. Ayana raised her hand for silence, then turned back to Sarah. "My husband is dead 3 winters now, killed by soldiers from your Fort Apache. But before the blue coats came, he taught me that strength comes not from the fist, but from protecting those who cannot protect themselves." She paused, studying Sarah's battered face. "You are like a wounded bird, far from her nest. But some of my people say wounded birds bring bad medicine." "I understand if you want me to leave," Sarah whispered. I don't know where else to go." "There is nowhere else," Ayana said simply. "The desert will claim you before sunset. But staying—" She looked toward the men still arguing in the shade. "That has its own dangers." An elderly Apache man approached, his face weathered like old leather, but his eyes sharp and alert. Ayana spoke to him rapidly in their native tongue, pointing occasionally at Sarah's injuries. The old man, clearly someone of importance, listened carefully, then knelt beside Sarah. "I am Na'al-Nish," he said, his English heavily accented, but clear, "war leader of this band. The woman Ayana speaks for you, but others say you bring trouble. Your sheriff husband will come looking. He will bring soldiers." "He might," Sarah admitted, "but I never asked to be here. I was dying in the desert." Na'al-Nish studied her for a long moment. "You show respect. You do not demand, only speak truth." He stood, his decision made. "You may stay until you are strong, but when your husband comes, and he will come, you must be ready to choose. Will you go back to your cage or will you fight?" Sarah looked around at the faces watching her, some hostile, some curious, but all of them free in a way she had never been. "I've already made my choice," she said quietly. "I'll never go back." The old war leader nodded slowly. "Then may the mountain spirits give you strength, white woman. You will need it." 3 days had passed since Sarah's arrival at the hidden canyon, and the desert rhythms were slowly healing her body, if not her spirit. Under Ayana's patient care, the swelling in her face had subsided, and her torn feet were beginning to mend. She spent her days helping with simple camp tasks, grinding mesquite pods into flour, weaving baskets from willow shoots, learning words in the Apache tongue that felt strange, but musical on her lips. The Apache children, initially shy around the white woman, had begun to warm to her. They giggled when she mispronounced their names and delighted in teaching her their games. Sarah found herself smiling, actually smiling, for the first time in years. But the peace was fragile and everyone knew it. Young Apache scouts rode in and out of camp daily, their painted ponies lathered with sweat and urgency. Sarah noticed how conversations stopped when she approached, how the warriors' hands never strayed far from their weapons. The tension was building like storm clouds on the horizon. On the 4th morning, a scout named Goyakla burst into camp, his pony foam-flecked and trembling. He spoke rapidly to Na'al-Nish in their native tongue, his words causing a ripple of alarm through the gathered people. Sarah didn't need translation. The fear and anger in the young man's voice told her everything. Ayana appeared at her side, her face grave. "Your husband has discovered your trail. He rides with 50 men, townspeople, ranchers, even some soldiers from the fort. They are 1 day behind, maybe less." Sarah's blood turned to ice water. 50 men? For one woman? "Not for one woman," Na'al-Nish said, approaching with his war paint already applied, stark black and red stripes across his weathered cheeks. For Apache honor. Your husband, he tells everyone we have taken you by force. He says we torture you, hold you for ransom. The White Eyes, they believe what they want to believe. The war leader's eyes blazed with an anger that had been building for generations. For 30 years we fight to keep our homeland. For 30 years we try to live in peace. But always there is some excuse for the white man to come with guns and take more of what is ours. Sarah felt the weight of guilt crush down on her shoulders. This is my fault. If I leave now, go back with him. You will die, Ayanna said flatly. I have seen men like your husband before. The rage in them burns like wildfire. He will kill you slowly and enjoy it. Besides, Nalnish added, with a warrior's grim smile, it is too late for peace. Goyakla tells me they have already burned 2 wiki-ups at the winter camp near Salt River. Old people and children barely escaped with their lives. Your husband, he wants war. Now he will have it. The camp exploded into activity. Warriors painted their faces and checked their weapons, a mix of traditional bows and arrows alongside captured rifles. Women began packing essential supplies, while children were gathered and prepared for what might come. But there was no panic, only the disciplined urgency of a people who had survived by being ready for the worst. Sarah watched the preparations with growing dread. How many warriors do you have? In this camp? 23, Nalnish replied, but runners have already gone out. By tonight, 300 Apache warriors will be in these hills. Every band within a day's ride will come. Your husband wanted to make this about Apache honor, so we will show him what Apache honor truly means. That evening, as the sun painted the canyon walls blood red, Sarah sat with Ayanna beside a small fire. The older woman worked steadily on a pair of Apache moccasins, her hands sure despite the dim light. These are for you, Ayanna said without looking up. Your white woman's shoes. They are no good for running in the desert. I won't run, Sarah said quietly. I'm tired of running. Ayanna paused in her work, studying Sarah's face in the firelight. You have changed much in 4 days, white woman. When you came to us, you were broken, like a Mustang with its spirit beaten out. Now there is fire in your eyes again. My name is Sarah, she said. Sarah McKinnon, though I suppose that name won't mean much after tomorrow. Names are important, Ayanna agreed. They tell us who we are, where we come from. But sometimes when the old life dies, we must choose new names for the new life. She held up the finished moccasins. Try these. The soft buckskin felt strange on Sarah's feet after years of tight leather boots, but they moved with her feet like a second skin. Standing, she took a few experimental steps. For the first time since childhood, her feet made no sound on the ground. In our tongue, Ayanna said, we would call you Istzan-i-Nadlihi, woman who walks in silence. It is a good name for someone who wishes to leave her old footprints behind. From somewhere in the darkness beyond the fire, the sound of horses echoed off the canyon walls. Not the ponies of Apache scouts, but the heavy hoofbeats of cavalry mounts and the creak of leather saddles. The hunt had found them at last. Nalnish appeared out of the shadows, his face painted for war. They make camp at Devil's Backbone 5 miles south. In the morning they will come. Sarah looked around at the faces in the firelight. Warriors who would die for her, children who might become orphans, women who might become widows. All because she had finally found the courage to say no. I have to face him, she said, her voice steady. This has to end. Yes? Nalnish agreed, checking his rifle one final time. Tomorrow, it ends. One way or another. The morning sun cast long shadows across Devil's Backbone as Sarah crested the ridge, flanked by Nalnish and 20 Apache warriors. Below them, Tom McKinnon's camp sprawled across the desert floor like a military operation. 50 men armed with rifles, revolvers, and the self-righteous fury that came from believing they fought for civilization itself. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she spotted Tom near the center of camp, his sheriff's badge glinting as he gestured wildly to a group of townspeople. Even at this distance, she could see the rage radiating from him like heat waves off desert stone. Beside him stood Captain Morrison from Fort Apache, his blue uniform crisp despite the desert dust, and Mayor Hawkins from Copper Creek, whose political ambitions had always outweighed his common sense. Remember, Nalnish said quietly, his weathered hand resting on his rifle, we are here for justice, not revenge, but if they choose violence, he didn't need to finish. Sarah could see the other Apache warriors positioned on the surrounding ridges, silent, deadly, and ready. Sarah McKinnon! Tom's voice boomed across the desert as he spotted her. You come down here right now, you've caused enough trouble. Sarah urged her borrowed pony forward, feeling the soft buckskin of her new moccasins gripping the stirrups. She was no longer the broken woman who had fled into the desert. The Apache had given her more than shelter. They had given her back her strength. "I'm not coming back, Tom," she called down, her voice carrying clearly in the thin desert air. "I won't let you hurt me anymore." Captain Morrison stepped forward, his hand resting on his saber hilt. "Mrs. McKinnon, these savages have filled your head with lies. Come down peacefully, and we'll forget this unfortunate incident." A bitter laugh escaped Sarah's lips. "Lies? Look at my face, Captain. Look at what your civilized sheriff did to his own wife." The bruises had faded, but the marks of Tom's violence were still visible. Several of the townspeople shifted uncomfortably, perhaps seeing clearly for the first time what they had chosen to ignore for years. "She's been brainwashed," Tom snarled, drawing his revolver. "These heathens have poisoned her mind against her own people." "My own people?" Sarah's voice rose with years of suppressed fury. "My own people stood by and watched while you beat me senseless every weekend after you crawled out of Murphy's saloon. My own people looked the other way when I came to church with black eyes and broken ribs. Don't talk to me about my people, Tom McKinnon." Mayor Hawkins cleared his throat nervously. "Now, Sarah, I'm sure we can work this out. Marriage has its difficulties, but—" "You want to work it out?" Sarah interrupted, her voice cutting like a blade. "Then arrest him. Arrest the man who broke my nose twice, who cracked 3 of my ribs, who threatened to kill me if I ever tried to leave. Show me this civilization you claim to represent." An uncomfortable silence fell over the posse. Several men lowered their weapons, uncertainty creeping into their faces. This wasn't the rescue mission they'd signed up for. But Tom wasn't finished, his face purpled with rage as he raised his gun toward the ridge. "I don't care what lies you've been telling these savages, woman. You're my wife, and you're coming back with me, dead or alive." The click of 30 rifles being cocked echoed off the canyon walls like thunder. Every Apache warrior on the surrounding ridges had their weapons trained on the men below. The message was unmistakable. Captain Morrison's hand moved instinctively toward his saber, then stopped as he realized the hopelessness of their position. "Sheriff McKinnon, perhaps we should reconsider—" "The hell we will!" Tom screamed, his revolver wavering between Sarah and Nalnish. "So I'm not being made a fool of by some drunk squaw lover and his painted friends." The slur hit the air like a match thrown into gunpowder. Nalnish's face hardened into a mask of granite, but his voice remained level. "Your words show what manner of man you are, Sheriff. Your wife seeks protection from your violence, and we have given it. That is Apache law, to protect those who cannot protect themselves." "Apache law?" Tom spat. "The only law that matters out here comes from the barrel of a gun." He swung his revolver toward Nalnish, but Sarah was faster. Her borrowed horse leaped forward as she threw herself from the saddle, tackling Tom before he could fire. They hit the ground in a tangle of dust and fury, Sarah fighting with the desperate strength of someone who had nothing left to lose. "You want me so bad," she gasped, wrestling for control of his gun. "Then take me. But you'll never break me again, Tom McKinnon, never." The revolver went off, the bullet screaming harmlessly into the sky. Tom's greater strength began to tell, his hands closing around Sarah's throat, when a rifle shot cracked from the ridge above. The bullet took Tom's hat clean off his head, leaving him stunned and gasping. 50 rifles were now pointed directly at his skull. "The next shot will not miss," Nalnish called down, his voice carrying the absolute certainty of death. "Release her, or join your ancestors today." Tom's hands fell away from Sarah's throat as the reality of his situation finally penetrated his rage-clouded mind. All around him, his posse was slowly backing away, their courage evaporating under the steady gaze of Apache rifle barrels. Sarah struggled to her feet, her chest heaving. When she spoke, her voice carried a strength that surprised even her. "I'm not your property, Tom, I never was, and I choose to stay with people who understand what honor really means." Captain Morrison holstered his weapon with careful deliberation. "I think we've heard enough. Sheriff McKinnon, you're under arrest for assault and attempted murder." "What?" Tom's voice cracked with disbelief. "You can't arrest me. I'm the law in this territory." "You were the law," Morrison corrected grimly. "Now you're just a man who tried to murder his wife in front of 50 witnesses." 6 months later, the trading post at Willow Creek buzzed with an energy that had nothing to do with commerce. Sarah McKinnon, now known to her Apache friends as Istzane Nadlihi, stood behind the counter of her small store, carefully weighing out flour for Mrs. Henderson from town. The older woman's eyes still held traces of disapproval, but her money was as good as anyone's. "I still don't understand how you can live among them," Mrs. Henderson said, glancing nervously at the Apache families browsing the shelves. Sarah followed her gaze to where Ayanna was examining bolts of cloth with her daughter, their conversation a musical blend of Apache and English. "They saved my life, Mrs. Henderson. That tends to change one's perspective." The trading post had been Nalnish's idea, a neutral ground where Apache and white settlers could meet safely to exchange goods, and perhaps more importantly, understanding. Sarah's position as mediator between the two cultures had been natural, born from her unique circumstances and hard-won respect from both sides. The bell above the door chimed as Captain Morrison entered, his uniform dusty from the long ride from Fort Apache. He nodded respectfully to the Apache customers before approaching Sarah's counter. "Mrs. McKinnon," he said formally, though his eyes held warmth. "I bring news from Tucson." Sarah's heart skipped. Tom's trial? Concluded yesterday. 20 years hard labor at Yuma Territorial Prison. Morrison's expression was grim but satisfied. The judge said any man who would raise his hand against a woman deserved no mercy from the law. Relief flooded through Sarah like cool water in the desert. For months she had lived with the fear that somehow, some way, Tom would escape justice and return to make good on his threats. Now, finally, she could truly breathe free. "There's more," Morrison continued. "The territorial governor has issued an official apology to Chief Nalnish and his people for the unprovoked attack on their winter camp. There's talk of a formal treaty, guaranteed hunting rights, protection for Apache children in white schools, fair trading agreements." Through the window, Sarah could see Nalnish himself approaching on his paint horse, his weathered face creased in what she had learned to recognize as his version of a smile. At 73, the old war leader had lived to see something most of his generation never expected, genuine peace between their peoples. The door chimed again as Nalnish entered, followed by his grandson, a bright-eyed boy of 12, who had become one of Sarah's most enthusiastic English students. "Grandmother Sarah," the boy said in carefully practiced English, "will you tell us again the story of the woman who walked in silence?" Sarah laughed, ruffling his hair. In the months since her arrival in Apache territory, the children had adopted her as an honorary grandmother, a role that filled a space in her heart she hadn't even known was empty. "Later, little hawk. First, help me with these ledgers. A trader must know numbers in both languages." As the afternoon wore on, the trading post filled with its usual mixture of cultures. Apache women bartered beautifully woven baskets for metal tools and cloth. White ranchers, initially suspicious but gradually warming to the arrangement, traded cattle for Apache-guided safe passage through the mountains. Children from both cultures played together in the dusty yard outside, their laughter a sound that would have been impossible just months before. As evening approached and the last customers departed, Sarah found herself alone with Ayanna, the two women sharing coffee and the comfortable silence of deep friendship. "Do you ever regret it?" Ayanna asked in her direct way. "Leaving your old life behind?" Sarah considered the question, watching through the window as Apache and white children chased fireflies in the gathering dusk. Her small cabin behind the trading post was simple but clean, her life harder in some ways than it had been in town, but infinitely richer. "I regret that it took me so long to find the courage," she said finally. "I regret the years I wasted believing I deserved no better. But leaving, no, never." A coyote howled somewhere in the distance, answered by another, then another, until their voices wove together in the ancient song of the desert. Once, that sound would have frightened Sarah. Now it was simply part of the symphony of her new life. "The old medicine men say the coyote is a trickster," Ayanna said with a smile, "but also a teacher. Sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as disasters." Sarah nodded, thinking of that terrible night when she had struck Tom with the skillet and fled into the darkness. What had seemed like the end of everything had actually been the beginning of a life she never could have imagined, a life where she was valued not for her obedience, but for her strength. As the stars emerged in the vast Arizona sky, Sarah locked up the trading post and walked toward her cabin. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to bridge the gap between two worlds. But tonight, for the first time in her adult life, she would sleep without fear. The woman who had once been Sheriff Tom McKinnon's beaten wife was gone, buried in the desert sand, along with all the other things that belonged to the past. In her place stood Istzan E. Nadlihi, woman who walks in silence, free at last to make her own path through the world. And in the morning the desert would still be there, vast and dangerous and beautiful, but no longer empty of hope.